So, I presume most of the people who are listening live right now know what the so-called intellectual dark web is. But for people who want kind of a general overview, but like if they're newer to following politics or they're younger, maybe we should start there. So, the intellectual dark web as a term, I guess it was invented by Eric Weinstein, right?
Yeah, and he he very quickly distanced himself from it, saying it was always meant to be a little bit of a joke. But I think he only said that after everyone made so much fun of it, and the memes were endless, and yeah, it was great fun. But then Eric was like, "What? I always intended it to be kind of tongue in cheek." No, dude, you were pretty serious in the beginning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It kind of just mostly was hovering on the margin. Somebody made a website of it, which unfortunately no longer exists. What a tragedy.
So originally, the intellectual dark web was a term coined by Eric Weinstein, and then he, distanced himself from it. And then, well, he didn't immediately distance himself from it, but he, as we just said, he kind of said it was tongue in cheek, kind of a joke, but they were pretty serious. We all know. But then in May of 2018, so I guess we're like right around the 6 year anniversary mark of their debut in the New York Times. They had this like big puff piece titled Meet the Renegades of the Intellectual Dark Web. And she picked, like, I guess, some of her favorite characters from this, what she very wisely called a sleek website, but like I don't think it was a sleek website. It was basically just a list of these weirdos that were just posted on the internet by someone. But yeah, so she's like, "Oh, based on this sleek website, here are these amazing characters." And she introduced them with these like three defining features, like right in the beginning of the article. And here's what they were: men and women are different. Then the other defining characteristic was free speech. They all believe that free speech is under siege. And then the third one was that identity politics is a toxic ideology that is tearing American society apart. And I mean, if you even knew these people at that time, you know what a sham that is, because they were always very selectively pro free speech. They did not care if someone that they didn't like was being silenced. But what their free speech advocacy centered around was usually like someone having consequences, even the most minor consequences for, like, say, a racial slur or being awful to some minority or another. And as far as identity politics goes, I mean, Dave Rubin's entire career was based on identity politics. When he started, all his YouTube videos like began with him like talking about how he definitely is not right wing and how he's a disgruntled leftist because he is a gay married man and he likes pot or something like that. But he would always make sure to mention that he's a gay married man as a part of showing why he's on the left and not actually a right wing hack.
Yeah, which is really you can't get any more identity politics, quote unquote.
Right. And then, I mean, Sam Harris, too, right? He does this whole thing of using his Jewish identity as a way to minimize like extremely dangerous far right anti Semitism. So he's like, I'm Jewish. And even I say that anti Semitism is not really a big deal, even in the aftermath of a synagogue shooting. Or he'll be like, I can say this, I'm Jewish. The Jews, in part, brought the Holocaust on themselves. I mean, just like horrendous stuff.
I have written that the Jews are in part responsible for the Holocaust. How tribal is that? Now, that's part of my denigration of belief of faith-based religion. It's like if the Jews defining themselves as Jews for 2,000 years, insisting upon living insular lives among communities that believe antithetical things about God and thinking that it's important to marry within their community because of the profundity of their religious beliefs and their unique covenant with God. All of that divisive bullshit is part of the backdrop that gave us the centuries of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. So yeah, I'm someone who has made Judaism itself somewhat culpable in giving us the Holocaust. Now what am I, a neo-Nazi? What's my tribe?
And then he also uses, nowadays we're seeing his Jewish identity to be like, everything the left says about Israel is anti-Semitic. Every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. The IDF is the most moral army in the world, and if you don't agree with how morally they're bombing children, then you're anti-Semitic.
The other thing that Harris did is basically never talk about the Christian right. For somebody who is of Jewish ancestry and also a supposedly militant atheist, this guy has nothing to say about the Christian right. And you published a piece, which we'll put in the link. And I'm sorry, we got a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to put out into the space here in a second here. But
and
you published it.
If you're listening on the podcast, I will add the links to the show notes too. So.
Yeah. And for 2 years after the January 6th insurrection, Sam Harris did 2 mentions of Christian right, or just the word Christian, which is incredible, considering that, like, the people who were there, they literally did a Jericho march where they were simulating the attacking Congress in the name of God. That's literally what they did the day before. And
yeah, he did not mention
pictures of Jesus to the insurrection. A lot and crosses. But yeah, Sam Harris had nothing to say about any of that stuff, which is really incredible.
No, in fact, he blamed it on the woke mayor of Washington, D.C.
So ironically, it could be a fairly woke mayor's resistance to heavy-handed policing that left the Capitol undefended.
Yeah, which is hilarious because she had no authority. Donald Trump had that authority. And everybody knows that. People who defend Trump on the internet, they will say that, oh, he didn't, that was Nancy Pelosi had that authority. But in reality, in Congress, everybody knows that it is the president who is the commander of the National Guard. And you can literally see that on the DC National Guard website. This is not somebody making that up. This is the actual facts. So the first link that I'm going to drop in to the space here is the original website that was created that was called Intellectual Dark Web.
That Barry Weiss said was very sleek.
And you can check that out there. So there's a bunch of people that are listed in there. And some of them are, I think, maybe not as they're not as well known as some of the proponents, I think. And so it's worth looking in there, including Tim Ferriss, who I think most people have no idea who that is anymore. Or maybe do they never? I'm not sure. And then Stephen Hicks and James Damore, and Lindsay Shepard. These are all people who they're not talked about nowadays too much. So
yeah, but once upon a time, James Damore was like the hero of that IDW podcast circuit, and but then he renamed his Twitter account. What did he call himself? Fired for Truth. He was the Google engineer that was fired because he decided to send some ridiculous memo. I think company wide.
Yeah. Sexist memo saying that there are not as many women in technology because, well, they're just dumber. That was basically the thesis of his memo. So it's a fun little trip down memory lane if anybody wants to check it out.
But also before we move on, I just wanted to go back to that identity politics point and talk about how much of their content centered on identity politics and finding these tokenized people that they could push forward to push their right-wing agenda, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali being one of their favorite so-called feminist secularist heroes, right? A woman of Somali background, an immigrant, but she basically talks like a white nationalist. And so they love that. And they were like, well, why can't the left respect her? She's a minority. She's an immigrant. It's like, this is not how it works, man. It doesn't matter like what background you're from, but if you're spouting unhinged things, people on the left will not respect you just because you're, say, a Black woman that is an immigrant from Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
your talking points, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that caricatured version of identity politics that they accuse the left of having. Like, they're like, oh, they will only listen to people if they are a certain degree of oppressed. That's not true. White men can't talk anymore. That's also not true. But they are the ones that employ this use of this ridiculous, yes.
And mascots, basically.
Yeah. I mean, we have Blair White, who is the trans right-wing favorite, right? Like, Ruben used to have her on all the time. All his videos were titled like "trans woman," blah blah, like hates on trans people. Obviously not that direct, but something to that effect. Black man says racism doesn't exist, or something like that.
Yep. And of course they do that with Caitlyn Jenner as well. So I did also in the space shared the link to the Barry Weiss article if anybody wants to go down memory lane with that as well. But one of the things that was also notable both in the article and the original IDW website is that they were at great pains to portray themselves as not ideologically conformist, like not all on the right. And in the Weiss article, she dances around the fact that everybody on here has in the IDW had right-wing opinions, but she has one fig leaf in there, and that is Ben Shapiro, who she says he was criticized for not liking Donald Trump in 2016. Which it was true that the far right did hate him for that.
Yeah.
But she also deliberately, and the thing that I am always a little bit unsure of is how much of it is stupidity and how much of it is malicious lying. It's impossible to know, I think, with these guys. But in her case, she did not mention that Ben Shapiro, he hated Donald Trump because he thought Donald Trump was a liberal. That's why the Never Trump movement got started. And I know because I was working in Republican politics at that time. Well, that was my last hurrah in Republican politics because I was had gotten to the point where I was like, well, the Republican Party hates its own voters, doesn't give a shit about them, and hates everybody else in the country. It only wants to have welfare for billionaires. So if Trump is a liberal, then hey, that would be nice. That was my attitude. And yeah, but like Shapiro hated Trump because he thought Trump was a rhino. I mean, this is a guy who says anything, right? If he thinks it'll help him. So at various points in time, he had criticized Pat Buchanan for being racist and pro-Hitler. He had supported abortion rights. He had opposed the Iraq War, not at the beginning, but eventually he came out against it. So there was some basis to believe that he was a little bit further to the left, at least verbally, right? Of course, that's not how he governed. But that's why Shapiro hated Trump, because he thought he was a liberal. So the very thing that she thought was an exception, or tried to mark as an exception, was not an exception at all. It was not true in any way, shape, or form. So
there are also some other like really funny sentences in that original IDW article where she talks about how these figures have been purged from institutions that have become increasingly hostile to unorthodox thought. And like, if you think about it, like what unorthodox thought? They're just echoing everything that is well accepted in the status quo. I mean, they're against anti-racism. That's fighting the status quo, right? Like, what has been accepted for decades and decades and decades in American society? It's like this base level of racism. To just want to go back to that, it's not unorthodox. That is orthodox.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And yeah, and actually there's another line that I thought was funny. Because she also says they all share three distinct qualities. First, to what you just said, that they are all willing to disagree ferociously, but talk civilly about nearly every meaningful subject: religion, abortion, immigration, and the nature of consciousness. Which that was not true even in the beginning. Like these guys
it was all wrong
anything.
from the moment that article came out. It's like they barely ever disagreed. Yeah, sure, they would always point to these things like, oh, look, Ben Shapiro is a religious conservative and I'm a non-religious. I won't say conservative, but do they spend any time debating abortion or anything like that? They didn't.
No, they didn't. And so and when they say about debating and talk civilly, these guys never invite anyone who has a really informed contrary opinion. None of them ever do that, and never have. Like what Joe Rogan does not invite people who can tell him that all those various supplements that he tries to sell people and says are really great. He never has real nutritionists on his show that are like, Joe, that's all bullshit, and there's a reason that the.
I think he did have some good people on Vax, I think, as a counter to his anti-vax stuff, but I think that was after he had a lot of pushback, and then he's like, okay, let me get some experts on for another opinion. I can't remember who or what.
Yeah, and it was a long time ago also. Like he stopped because there was at one point he had claimed he wanted to invite Peter Hotez, the vaccine researcher, who is not a debater of any kind. He's a research scientist and a pretty elderly guy, so obviously not somebody who would be experienced as a debater. Never has, as he has said himself. And he was like, I'm not going to do that. But meanwhile, there were and I saw the tweet on this. There were like 10 or 15 people who were like, hey, I'm a science communicator. I'm a vaccine researcher. I'm a doctor. I will debate this with you, Joe. Have me on your show. And not one of those people has ever been invited on Joe Rogan's show because they don't want anybody to know that they're not actually really smart. That's really what
with Joe Rogan, the secret's out.
Well, granted, yeah, but it's sad. Like I do see people even now that are like, Joe Rogan, he is smart. And I'm like, well, okay, I think I'm done here with this kind of.
Yeah, I think if someone is defending Joe Rogan's intellectual capabilities, then there's not much point in arguing. That's like arguing with a flat earther. But even Sam Harris, he goes on about how open-minded he is, how he doesn't want to be wrong for a second longer than he has to be, and how quickly he's willing to revise his positions when new information is presented. But he does not invite anyone. Just after October 7th, the amount of sheer propaganda, sheer IDF propaganda he's put out into the world is just shameful for anyone that considers themselves an intellectual to just buy military propaganda at this level. It's disgusting. And he's one of his most recent guests was a fan of Netanyahu, and he's been invited on to comment as an objective and neutral commentator on urban warfare and the tactics of the most moral IDF. And it's like, who is buying this? Yeah. Never once has he sought an opinion that is different on this issue.
Yeah, he really doesn't. And it's really important to note that because, in Israel, the politics, people talk about all kinds of dissenting opinions. Like you can find many, and if you only wanted to talk to Israelis, you could do that and have tons of dissenting opinions. And right now they're having Netanyahu is now having a big problem that people have realized in Israel, that he never had a plan about what happened after the invasion and still hasn't developed a plan for what happens after. And people are like, what the fuck? Why did you do this?
He clearly doesn't care about the hostages. He's rejected so many deals. He's sabotage deals, and he just wants to now cling on to his power as long as he can. There's no plan, there's no concern for hostages or anything of the sort.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned about with regard to Dave Rubin, and so for us to get into the history a little bit, because these guys obviously are transparently right wing, and you found a clip that I thought
You gave away I'm sure no one is surprised. You gave away the whole thing of the title. That was our question. We were supposed to hang on to that mystery till the last moment.
Yeah, I spoiled it. Sorry.
Aw.
Well, okay. So there's a clip from Dave Rubin when Dennis Prager interviewed him, and
this is from the fireside chat, right?
Yeah. And I don't remember the year that this came out though. So
I would say maybe 2017 or something, maybe 2016, something like that.
Okay, so I shared it in the space here for people. So I'm going to play it. If you can't hear it very well in the live stream, you can just watch it in the tweet. So here it is, though, for those who just want to follow along with us.
I want you to continue to say you're a liberal because you're a great use to good value.
Well, don't worry, I'm not doing it for your use of me. I'm doing it for myself.
No. It's like Christians who say to me, "Oh, we would love you to come to Christ, but you are so valuable to us as a Jew when you defend us Christians." Yeah. And they're right. You are valuable in the best sense of the word, because America needs people who are clearly liberal and to be honest, and fall into the category of kosher as gay, to say, hey, hello, the conservatives are not hate mongers. Hello, they should be heard. And maybe every so often you should read National Review, right? Or watch a PragerU video.
What's the context on that for people who didn't see that or originally?
Well, they used to do these. I think I can't remember if Rubin and Prager did these regularly. I know Prager did them regularly. Fireside chats where he would just be sitting with someone and just have a more casual chat with them. This was one with Rubin where he was telling him that basically it's so useful to us on the right that you still identify as the liberal, because then we can say, look, even this liberal who is gay thinks that the left has gone crazy. And we can show them that, look, we even have like a gay guy on our side. We're not all homophobic hate mongers here. And then he gave the example of himself where he's like, oh, my Christian friends they tell me that I'm so useful to them as a Jew. And basically he's just laying it out that they find their tokens so useful. And it was a rare moment of honesty there from the right.
Yeah. And it's important to note that they were doing that because, to go back to what you were saying earlier about that, they don't have any new ideas. Like they are constantly claiming to be, we're about free thinking and new voices and new thoughts and etc. But everything they say is just the same old shit and just recycled right-wing nonsense. So, and this is something that historically the right wing has been doing this for decades, literally.
So can I just read a couple of the quotes from the Barry Weiss article, just because they're so perfect at this moment? Here she's talking about how, because they're this group that is formed on those who are expelled because of their unorthodox thought, they kind of draw in some other characters, and should they be drawing lines or should they not be drawing lines? Are the members of the IDW aligning themselves with people whose views and methods are poisonous? Could the intellectual wildness that made this alliance of heretics worth paying attention to become its undoing? And then it goes on to say, of course, the whole notion of drawing lines to keep people out is exactly what inspired the IDW folks in the first place. They're committed to the belief that setting up no-go zones and no-go people is inherently corrupting to free thought. it's just so funny to me because firstly, the idea that this is intellectual wildness, right? Where they parrot the state talking points or just the accepted status quo for decades. The intellectual wildness of wanting to cling on to early 19th century racism or something,
Or sexism.
or sexism, or redoing the homophobia panic by targeting trans people. So this is not intellectual wildness. This is not unorthodox thought. This is absolutely orthodox thought that is fighting to cling to the status quo so hard. And what they don't like is when the status quo is challenged, and they're constantly trying to portray themselves as countercultural when they're abso-fucking-lutely not.
They also love to talk about the marketplace of ideas, like that's their phrase they're in love with.
Right.
The reality is they lost in the marketplace of ideas, in some cases more than 100 years ago. Like Ben Shapiro believes in creationism in some form. Like, and Tucker Carlson just recently said that he does not believe that humans evolved and that they were created by God in their present state, and that the Bible is true. And like, these are objectively stupid ideas that were they were debunked more than 100 years ago. Whether it was Charles Darwin's On the Origins of Species, or whether it was the emergence of higher criticism in the biblical scholarship, people have known for 100. Like, that was the whole point of Friedrich Nietzsche. His entire body of work was to say, okay, you know what? All that stuff that we thought about religion was bullshit, and we now know that. So what happens next? And these guys have been, and the people who came before them have been trying to deny that happened.
What happens next, Matthew, is that they all turn towards Christianity to fight wokeness. That's what happens next.
Yeah, it is, and we definitely want to get into that later. But just going further back into the history, as a political writer, for me, it is a continual disappointment that the mid-20th century literary critic Lionel Trilling, he summarized politics correctly in 1950. And nothing that he said about in this statement, what I'm going to read, has ever been disproven. It's been continuously true. And any insight that anyone can add to it, it's to some degree, it's all just kind of a filigree. And here's what he said. He said, in the United States at this time, liberalism is not only the dominant, but even the sole intellectual tradition. For it is the plain fact that nowadays there are no conservative or reactionary ideas in general circulation. This does not mean, of course, that there is no impulse to conservatism or to reaction. Such impulses are certainly very strong, perhaps even stronger than most of us know. But the conservative impulse and the reactionary impulse do not, with some isolated and some ecclesiastical exceptions, express themselves in ideas, but only in action or in irritable mental gestures, which seek to resemble ideas. And that's Jordan Peterson right there, isn't it? This guy had Jordan Peterson's number when Jordan Peterson was a teenager.
So expand a little bit on why you think there's no conservative ideas in circulation.
Sure, yeah. Well, so what I mean by that is that the IDW and their ancestors, whom we will discuss, you're constantly saying, well, we need to have our ideas debated. Our ideas are worth talking about. They're worth debating. But they don't actually present ideas. So in other words, they could write academic research papers purporting to show that, let's say, women are stupider, or that the Bible is literally true, or humans did not evolve. They could write papers to say those things, to make those assertions. They don't. And
no, there are a lot of very stupid race science-y papers and all kinds of papers.
Yeah, well, those are the only exception. Like, you do not see papers saying that this is proof humans did not evolve, or this is proof that there was a flood of Noah. Like, there's bullshit books that are, and they make lots of money about it, but they are not academic in any pretense of the word. And I'll give an example of what I mean. Like, so I was born and raised as Mormon before I left it in 2005, and there's a guy in Mormonism. So they also have kind of this very IDW-esque parallel world, trying to say that Mormonism is true and that the truth of Mormonism is censored by society. It's actually hilarious to see if you want to go down the rabbit hole one day. But there's this guy in who's kind of like their grand poobah in that world named Daniel Peterson. And Daniel Peterson he produces real scholarship as a professor. I guess he retired as a professor of Islamic studies. And he's written a number of academic books and papers about Islam as the literary traditions and historical things about it. But he's never published an academic paper about the Book of Mormon, arguing that it's true. And it's such an embarrassing situation for them. They went and had to go and start their own kind of fake academic journal that they called the Book of Mormon Studies, Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, which it's almost like having a Journal of Klingon Studies or Lord of the
What
Rings.
about the IDW-esque journal that they started? What was it called? The Journal of Dangerous Ideas? Or
I know, yeah, no, like the stuff they publish is ridiculous gobbledygook, and it's nonsense, and it's not based on sound observation. It's not based on real studies. Like, they really do not do any of these things, and so like that really is what Trilling meant, because that's exactly how they were behaving even back then. Like, so when the higher biblical criticism emerged, and the idea that it's obvious when you read the Bible in the original text, and even to some degree in a good translated version, that the God that is referenced in the Bible, it's referred to by different names in different books, and so you can infer that, well, maybe there are some of these books were written by people who were part of one tradition, and some people were part of another tradition, and the evidence for it is just overwhelming that is the case. And it's overwhelming that Judaism is descended from Canaanite pagan theology. Like, there is absolutely zero evidence to the contrary. And Christian fundamentalists, they don't even know about this stuff. They literally do not know about it. Like, for instance, the main god of the Bible, or I guess who ended up as the main god, he had a wife, and her name was Sarah, and she's in the Bible. And people and the ancient Hebrews, they prayed to her and they worshipped her. And you can see that in the Bible that they did, but they don't tell you.
yeah, but I don't understand how that means that there's no right-wing thought. Like, I mean, sure, they may have their own versions of journals or whatever, but that thought is still very much there, right? Like,
well, he meant it as in like actual sound academic thinking is what he meant. And the reality is, like, if you go and read the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, there's nothing in there that is of any consequence. And in the same way that...
Yeah, but I mean, there's the race science studies too, right? And you're not like... I mean, you and I can say that there's nothing sound in there, but there are loads of people convinced that this is actually the science that the wokes want to hide from you because it's...
Well, and that's why he said irritable mental gestures which seek to resemble ideas, and that's the key, is that for people who actually do the most cutting edge research in social development or human cognition, they think these journals are and things they come out with are nonsense, and they're not based on sound methodology. So that's what I mean when I say that they are irritable mental gestures seeking to resemble ideas.
It's so funny because I went to look at Brett Weinstein's Twitter timeline because I haven't checked in on him for a while, and wow, that guy has really gone off the rails. Like, we know he's an anti-vaxxer and is a weird Evo psych, like to the point of caricature weirdo, where he thinks that I forget the funniest one. I did this Evo Psych episode a while ago, and we had a clip in there where he was talking about, I forget, like, I think if you're hanged, you evolve to what was it? Something really ridiculous, like pregnancy and people that are being hanged. I can't remember, but it was beyond ridiculous. Anyways,
So many things that were very remote contingencies in history have apparently produced offspring, like, the apparent tendency of people being hung to orgasm, right? What is that? That is likely to be the body taking one last shot. There's no point. There's no
This
way.
is a new one on me. You think
You're
that
talking about
ever
autoerotic
resulted?
asphyxiation? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, actually, I wasn't talking about that, but it's a better example. It shows you that there's some part.
Being hung? What do you mean then?
I mean,
He's talking about actual execution.
I think grammatically, I mean being hanged.
Right, being hanged. Yeah, I'm so confused.
So I had to be a little
get
careful because
orgasms when they
I'm
die.
working from anecdote here. I have read that, but I don't know of any.
Many people are checking the underwear. People just got hung.
Jeez. But my point would be, what has to be true in order for such a pattern to evolve? So let's take autoerotic asphyxiation.
It's dandelion strategy. I mean, is what you're arguing basically. This is dandelions who go to seed after you pick them and spread their seeds, right? Like, is that going to work?
Last ditch efforts at reproduction. Hail Marys. And so the point is, I think this is probably not obvious unless you're used to thinking evolutionarily, but in order for a pattern to occur where some entity releases sexual propagules on death, in order for that to evolve, it has to have worked enough times for that pattern to have accumulated. And so if autoerotic asphyxiation is the result of people tapping into that thing and, traversing a landscape near death in order to increase sexual pleasure, what that suggests is that landscape near death has actually had a certain amount of reproduction happen in it that has resulted in this circuitry being present.
that was a little sidetrack there. So he's just tweeted.
I'm sorry.
Brett Weinstein.
Okay.
Brett Weinstein, the so-called evolutionary biologist, he tweeted last month, "My critics want you to know that my perspective often conflicts with that of the experts. I also want you to know that." He thought that was some really profound, indicator of how brilliant he is. But really, all it is that, yeah, you're always wrong, dude. There's nothing more to it. You conflict with the experts on everything not because you're smarter, because you're just saying
dumber.
because you're saying the opposite things all the time. He's talking now about how the sun is going to, I don't know. I'm no scientist, but what I saw on his timeline seemed very kooky conspiracy theory territory, talking about how the sun is going to finish the earth. And he's a climate change denier, I believe. So it's not like that. It's like some other thing.
Yeah.
Very weird Alex Jonesian Twitter timeline happening.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. And actually, one of our listeners on the space here, Nick, had quoted me, or it's quoted a video to me from Bad Stats of Jordan Peterson, really exemplifying what we're talking about here. Jordan Peterson says he regrets having Destiny on his podcast because he didn't agree with him enough. And that instead he liked having Russell Brand on, who basically praised him nonstop for 90 minutes. This is what they are claiming is a debate. This is not a debate, and that's why they don't want to act. This is why all of these people they block actual critics on YouTube on Twitter because they don't want to converse with them because they have nothing. They have no response.
Well, also, Peterson has talked endlessly about how much he hates the democratization of communication through social media. He hates that just anyone can criticize him who is famous Like he wants there to be consequences. He's like, I don't like that they have access to me. They have access to everyone that follows me can see what they wrote. And I have built up my reputation and my following through so much credibility and hard work and whatever. No, dude, you built it up because you're a racist, misogynist. That's it. And he seems to think that he's worked so hard to get all these followers. So why should just some nobody be able to say, hey, dumbass, underneath one of his tweets? And he wants there to be serious consequences for that, right? Like he wants to know who said it, what's their name, what's their workplace. And he's very mad that he cannot know that.
But he also supports free speech. I don't know. And open-ended intellectual inquiry and discussion. Like it's total bullshit. And I think another example, and this is admittedly kind of a petty parallel, but it's a hilarious one nonetheless. And that is that, so Barry Weiss's article, it is actually not the first time that somebody writing in the New York Times tried to whitewash right-wing ideas and say that they were a different kind of conservative.
I am shocked, utterly shocked.
So the parallel is so hilarious. As everybody may remember, the article was illustrated with these absolutely hilarious photos of the subjects of the article in the dark, in like Joe Rogan was posing things behind him.
Suggestively holding the tree branches and stuff. Yeah.
That's right. And Eric Weinstein, was jacking off a tree branch in the dark.
That was Brett, but yeah.
Oh, was it? I'm sorry. Yeah, Brett, sorry. Christina Hoff Sommers, was photographed wearing a leopard print jacket and looking sort of suppressed and repressed and censored. Lone wolf out in the wilderness, speaking her truth. But in 1995, New York Times ran an article almost exactly with the same premise, that this is a new generation of people, and they're different from Phyllis Schlafly or the older conservatives. They're not like them. And some of them are gay, and some of them are women, and they have sex. And
amazing.
And hilariously enough, the two women who were photographed in the article were wearing leopard print. That's what.
And I believe I read the caption in that piece, that 1995 piece, like slutty, not nutty, or something like that. I don't know. I think that's what the leopard print is supposed to allude to, that these are like open women. They're not repressed. They're not traditional.
Yeah.
As you say, they're different from the older conservatives, these new conservatives. And that article was titled The Counterculture.
Yeah.
Which is something that Paul Joseph Watson, formerly from InfoWars, also started using in the early Rubin days. He would, like 2015, Paul Joseph Watson was like, I don't know, always being talked about on Twitter. And he would tweet about how conservatism is the new counterculture.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just such a contradictory statement in itself, but people seem to buy it like all the time.
Yeah, well, at least some people, yeah. I think primarily it was people who were conservatively inclined as well.
Yeah, so that article, the counterculture article in the New York Times from 1995, mentions about how many like women there are in this new group of conservatives, mentions this rising star called Kathy Young, and talks about how she had these like brochures of this group called the Women's Freedom Network, which was like a conservative lobbying group formed in 1993. And they were formed to seek alternatives to both, quote unquote, extremist ideological feminism and also anti-feminist traditionalism. So like very much this faux centrism that we see everywhere nowadays, right? Like it's posed as if there are equal problems in feminism and like hardcore trad wife bullshit, and these are like the reasonable middle ground. And we see so many different degrees of that now. There are, firstly, the obvious IDW types who brand themselves centrist, but then they let themselves be known by leaning almost extremely far right, by doing great replacement theory stuff and having associations with people like Douglas Murray, who is basically a white nationalist with a posh British accent. And then there are like milder versions that are like, no, those guys are not the right centrists, but we are actually centrists. And we are the center between the people who pretend to be center, but also the woke overreach. And we are the reasonable center. And I feel like every time someone is branding themselves like a reasonable centrist, they most definitely are not. It's like a red flag to my ears immediately.
Yeah, and it is important to note that because like most people who are centrists are actually conservatives. And
yeah, I certainly feel that.
Well, and Edmund Burke, actually, who is the sort of often credited as the founder of conservatism as a philosophy, explicitly said that he viewed conservatism as moderation, and that's what he was doing, not being conservative. And it's, I think, one of the most important things to understand about why American politics is so fucked up and why the activists in America are exporting their horrible ideologies to other countries is that the right-wing activists in America are not conservatives. They are reactionaries. They are authoritarians. Because a conservative is somebody who is kind of like, well, I'm okay with some social change, but I just don't want it to be so fast. They're not somebody who says, we need to roll back these things that people count on, like abortion rights or like same-sex marriage or things like that. A conservative would never want to get rid of those things. Like Dwight Eisenhower is an example of somebody who was a conservative, that when he became the president, the far right in the Republican Party was telling him that he needed to get rid of Social Security because it was communist or whatever bullshit variety of things they said to him. And he was like, no, people like this. And I'm not going to take something away from people that is helpful to them and helpful to society. And it's because he was a conservative. And like, so if the position, if the two positions are between progressives and authoritarians, well, what do you think is the middle? It's conservatives. But these guys they can't admit that they're conservative. They are loath to admit. And it's an interesting thing to see. So let me see if I can pull up the 1995 article. It's absolutely worth seeing because, yeah, there's so many people who are mentioned in there as these new, young, different kind of politics, different kind of free thinkers. And one of them is Laura Ingraham, who is actually who was pictured in the leopard print skirt on the cover of the story. So, and nobody at this, like, that is what is important to know about the IDW is that they claim to not be conservative, but if we were to look at them 20 years from now, no one at that point in time would be like, oh, this person's not a right-wing person. Like, everyone knows that Laura Ingraham is right-wing. Everyone knows that the guy who, one of the other people who was mentioned, was Rush Limbaugh's call screener. Everyone knows that Rush Limbaugh's call screener was conservative. Like, no one thought that any of these people were centrist in any fucking way.
Right, but this is why also, like, the IDW very quickly abandoned that term, even though, like, people like you and I, we use it because it's a very useful identifier for that type, right? But they were like, oh, I'm handing in my retirement, I'm handing in my IDW card, I'm officially retiring, or whatever bullshit they were saying at the time. Eric Weinstein was like, oh, this was always meant to be a joke. You guys are laughing at us, but like, we meant it to be funny. And just as soon as everyone started to clue into the fact that intellectual dark web just means like a gross bunch of far to very far right-wing assholes that just don't want to admit it, then they're like using other euphemisms. People use heterodox now, right? And even heterodox as a label is so inaccurate because they're all parroting the age-old orthodoxies of wanting the same kind of racism, measuring skulls, or doing sexism, homophobia, all those things. They're all the same.
Yeah, they are, and they haven't changed. And that's, like, that is why I do think that 1995 article, everybody should read that who's trying to figure out these people.
It's funny because that article mentioned Bill Kristol, and it talks about how he said, I was able to rebel against my own generation in college and instead of my parents' generation. Like, imagine the kind of loser that you have to be like, in college or in school. Be like, no, actually, my parents' generation was right. And I'm going to rebel against you guys.
Yeah, and by the way, Bill Kristol was in college in the 70s and 80s, and that was when supposedly the counterculture that Paul Joseph Watson claims to have inherited. It's like, no, the right wing was against that right at that time. Like, you were never the counterculture. Your ideas were never counterculture, and they are not now.
They just want it to so desperately sound cooler, right? Like, try to make it punk or something. But it's like, what's his name? Steve Urkel instead.
Yeah, or it's like the meme, how do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really what it is. And you can see there, I mean, because so much of being right wing in the modern age it's almost entirely psychological rather than ideological. Because they don't have ideas. All they have is, or they don't want to present what they actually think, because it's not based on anything real. It's just based on what they feel. So, like, right.
And yet they go on about how facts don't care about your feelings, right? When really they're the ones that will put their head in the sand and avoid facts at all costs because their feelings are hurt about, like, almost any issue. You can just look at it. Look at Israel. I mean, they are not engaging with the facts at all.
Yeah, no, they're not. And that's why, and I was like, the stuff that they say, to go back to Lionel Trilling, like, they're not ideas, they are tropes. That's really what they are. And the tropes are always the same, and they just rotate depending on what's in the news. And the tropes are ungrateful youth, nasty woman, scary minority, sexual degenerate, and haughty intellectual. Literally everything that right-wingers say fits in one of those buckets. And because they don't offer any policies. Again, like, Netanyahu had no plan about what happens with Gaza after he invaded it. And he still has no plan about what happens in Gaza. And Republicans, they voted more than 60 times to repeal Obamacare, and they never came up with an alternative to it. And then finally, when Trump was the president, they finally had to come up with one, and then they voted against it and didn't even bother to try to enact an alternative. And then you're seeing that with abortion. Like, the right-wing position, they never wanted to tell you what they really wanted, which is, to force women to bear all pregnancies and to take away contraception. Like, that's what they want. They want to force women into marriages and trick them into marriages, failing that.
Well, you can see even with, like, Steven Crowder openly talking about how he, is well, now they're starting the conversation about how no-fault divorce is actually a problem and how that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, they are. And Charlie Kirk, he's constantly going off about that young women need to get married and as soon as possible and start having kids as soon as possible, because they know.
Matt Walsh too.
Yeah, they're all going off about it. Like, they And they claim that, well, we're just trying to be in favor of families, but that's really not what it is. That they know that their ideas can't convert people anymore. They can't convert, so they have to reproduce. That's basically what it comes down to. Like they're
Well, and also astroturf, right? Like the amount of astroturfing that we have in right wing media, right wing organizations, right wing think tanks, we do not have anything like that remotely on the left, except for George Soros accusations, ridiculous conspiracy theories about how he's funding protesters to go to protests. They just don't seem to understand that people actually themselves want to go and protest something because of how many right-wing gatherings have been astroturfed and paid for.
yeah, no, exactly. So let's maybe go back to the history a little bit more. But yeah, these rebranding attempts, they've been going on for they've been going on for 80 years now, actually. And they're trying to whitewash reactionary and authoritarian viewpoints as not what they are, as centrist or contrarian or heterodox. And William F. Buckley was really the guy who got this all started. So the far right in the U.S. was very broadly discredited after World War II because they were pro-Hitler. They were avowedly pro-Hitler. They literally had a rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City where they had giant posters of Hitler and the American flag. And that was so devastating to them, and also their complete failure of policy failure of they literally wanted to do nothing about the Great Depression as millions of people were starving and out of work. And they were like, let's just let it happen. And rightfully, they got completely trounced for decades electorally because of that. And so William F. Buckley, when he came along, he made it his mission to try to improve the image of authoritarianism in the United States. And he did that by looking up words in the dictionary and using them is basically what he seemed to do. Because it was...
Oh, I've seen that a lot in the IDW. A lot of people have a thesaurus these days.
Oh, really? I give an example of that. I haven't seen that.
I mean,
would love that.
Why do you think people don't recognize like how fashy Sam Harris is? One is his tone of voice. The other is because he uses fancy sounding words. Why do you think people didn't recognize Jordan Peterson? Exactly. Even though he sounds completely unhinged, no matter how many syllables his words have, the more syllables his words have, the crazier he sounds. But yeah, that fools some people. And then there's Douglas Murray. He's got this very posh accent and the nice vocabulary, and that's how they hide their authoritarianism.
Okay, yeah, no, great point. And Buckley, he was constantly working to rebrand himself and make people think that he was not far right, but in reality, he was privately corresponding with neo-Nazis. He was very good friends with one of them, actually, and his original protege was this guy named Joseph Sobrin, who was a virulent anti-Semite. His anti-Semitism became so obvious that Buckley finally had to get rid of him, but it wasn't because he was angry at Sobrin's ideas. It was because they were public. And he did the same thing with the John Birch Society, that he branded to the public that, I'm against this far right group. But in reality, in private, and we know this because his private papers are published, he wrote letters to Mary Goldwater, the 1964 Republican presidential nominee, and said to him, look, we need these Bircher people, but let's just try to take out the guy who's the president, Jack Welch, Robert Welch, and basically steal his organization from him. That was essentially what he was trying to do. And I mean, you just go down the line. Like his first book was called God and Man at Yale, and I recommend anybody who has any shred of doubt about or entertains any shred of this rebranding nonsense, read that book. Read God and Man at Yale. It is a horrible book demanding censorship from almost the beginning to the end. Buckley's basically saying that so-and-so professor doesn't believe in the resurrection. So-and-so professor doesn't believe in creation. So-and-so is an atheist. So-and-so is a communist. And basically saying, alumni of Yale, you should get these people fired. They should not be allowed to work here. And then at the same breath, he would go on TV, ABC News or whatever, and be like, we're for open exchange of ideas. We need to have the full arguments of everything that we're discussing. Oh, but also I want to ban and censor these professors. And then his second
And
book,
this is what Barry Weiss does, right? She goes on
Absolutely.
about how she's pro free speech, but she started her career like trying to get pro Palestine professors fired. And now, I mean, they're all like showing up in support of police cracking down on peaceful protesters.
Yeah, absolutely. And Buckley, his second book was a book it was called McCarthy and His Enemies. And it was literally a defense of Joe McCarthy, the most infamous political censor in American history. That's who was Buckley's hero, was Joe McCarthy. And his co-author in that book was a guy named Leo Brent Bozell Jr., who was a fascist, a Catholic fascist. And he was such a fascist that he decided he hated America so much and hated democratic tradition and secular government, hated it so much that he moved his entire family to Francisco Franco's fascist Spain. Like, that's how all this stuff got started. And so, and in 1964, though, so Buckley was trying to sort of clean up their reputation, but Barry Goldwater, he didn't fully go along with the idea. And he actually ran in his convention speech in 1964. He gave a speech that said, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. And he just got absolutely destroyed. And electorally, I think he won maybe only a handful of states, all of them pro-segregation states, of course. And so then that drove the Republican Party back underground. And you see this cycle over and over that basically when the
Can you
far right,
imagine like what the IDW would be like when there was segregation? They would be the ones that would do all this concern trolling, right?
Oh
like,
yeah. We can't upend society just because of the
Yes.
woke activists like Martin Luther King.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's not like we don't like equality. In theory, it's all great, but we can't just get there so fast. Like, some
Yeah,
people have higher IQs and some people have lower IQs, and we have to, go carefully. And
that was literally what National Review did in the 1960s and 50s, that they ran articles, and privately they were pelling around with segregationists and racists, and many of them were that as well. But publicly, the articles that they ran were saying, well, segregation, it has its problems, but we need to find a middle ground here. And because Black people, they're not capable of self-governance because of the historical trends. And so segregation is actually beneficial to them because they're just not smart enough to vote for officials on their own.
Wow. Like, that is just exactly what I was just saying right now, right?
Yeah, which and that's the same language they use with women right now. Like, this is how they talk about women's rights.
And also Palestinians. It's the exact, like, Douglas Murray is out there saying Palestinians can't run anything. Palestinians can't do anything. Have you seen the conditions that they've been living in? Ben Shapiro will tweet, like, Arabs like to bomb stuff and live in sewage.
Yeah, exactly. And that is really the history of American right-wing politics, is that they undertake a rebranding campaign and it gets them elected at some point to the presidency. And then they start putting in their ideas, and their ideas are horrible. Either they get elected or like they come to the front and it becomes such a disaster that then they have to go back and rebrand once again. And so that's what happened in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. That Ronald Reagan took all the same ideas of Barry Goldwater But he just said them with a smile on his face instead of screaming and scowling the way that Barry Goldwater did. And it worked. It convinced a lot of people that he was a normal politician and that he was somebody that they could trust. And he managed to win the 1980 election with that in 1984 as well. But, over time, Reagan he was the one who unlocked the religious right from politics through his Southern strategy, and also from the whole, like Ronald Reagan's people are the ones who did this, that really kind of set the tone for the politics that we have now. And one of the people that was key to his rise was Pat Buchanan. That Pat Buchanan was a Ronald Reagan speechwriter, but he is a Catholic fascist. And there was tension between the kind of business class Republicans who they just wanted power. That's all they wanted. They didn't have the racist views necessarily, but they knew that they needed the racist to win election. And so George Bush 41, he tried to back away from some of that harsher anti-government stuff with his 1988 campaign for president, where he said he wanted a kinder and gentler America. And that worked eventually, and he was able to win. But then the crazies came back in 1992 because Pat Buchanan didn't like it and challenged Bush and gave a very vociferous and extremely vicious speech in 1992. And Pat Buchanan created the word culture war, or the phrase culture war, or at least popularized it. And so, and this cycle, it continued. We had the contract with America, where they poll tested ideas and basically ran on things that I'd say were pretty anodyne, like term limits or things like that. But when they got into office, they did much more extreme things, and then that led to disaster in 1996 when they lost to Bill Clinton. So then George W. Bush did his compassionate conservatism. And then, of course, then that led to them creating once they got into office, all the compassionate rhetoric went out the window because they wanted to go and launch a global war on Islam and had the disasters of Iraq and Afghanistan. So that completely discredited them. Then the Tea Party came along, and they were independents. They were a new politics that weren't beholden to either party, even though they were paid for entirely by the co.
Right.
Then that takes us to the current iteration, which is the IDW. So that this is,
Though thankfully they're not in government, but
yeah, I know. God, that would be pretty awful if they were.
yeah. But I think we should maybe start wrapping up now. And before we go and before we open to questions, I just wanted to go back to something that Barry Weiss said, which was about how this group started because they were expelled from institutions for their unorthodox thought, and how they're heretics, and how they can't then start drawing lines about who they can accept and who they can't. It is a very unsustainable kind of position to be in, right? Like, you're this group of outsiders, as you brand yourselves, how you've been rejected for your unorthodox views, and how are you going to reject other people for their unorthodox views? So it gets them into some messy situations, right? And how they talk about how excluding those types of people is inherently corrupting of free thought. And so then we see, even in that original IDW website that Barry Weiss referenced, there were other people on there. There was Candace Owens, and Barry mentions Kanye. There was James Damore, Camille, or Paglia, I don't know how you say her name. There was this Owen Benjamin, Lindsay Shepard. And even though they're outside the main IDW characters, we can see just how ridiculous they are now, right? Like, Candace is known as Clandis Owens because she does stuff like praise Hitler and minimize racism, spout white nationalist talking points.
Yeah, and Owen Benjamin, same thing. He literally praises Hitler repeatedly and is an avowed white nationalist. And yeah, and like, I mean, it is.
And Ben Shapiro hired her knowing what a racist she was. He sat with her through her Hitler defending. But it's only once she started being critical of Israel for all the wrong reasons, certainly. But that is what got her fired, right? Like she has always been anti-Semitic, but Ben Shapiro was fine with that. But once Israel is questioned, that was the line for Ben, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, you reminded me of an episode of my Theory of Change podcast that I did about Shapiro and anti-Semitism, that Ben Shapiro is an anti-Semite. Like that is something that I think maybe a lot of people don't know, is that Ben Shapiro hates Jewish people who disagree with him. And according to him, they're not real Jews. And it is, and he actually, specifically on this point, he expressed his anti-Semitism in a discussion that he went on a white nationalist podcast.
Red Ice. Yes.
That's right. And went on the Red Ice podcast. And he had a great time with Lana Locktoff on that discussion. And Lana paired his discussion. She ran a promo for Kevin McDonald, who is probably the most infamous anti-Semite academic in the world. That was who was being promoted in this interview with Ben Shapiro. And they went on at length about, and Shapiro himself explicitly went on at length about how Jews in Hollywood, as he put it, have a war on Christianity and a war on males, and that they were doing it because they hated Christianity instead of realizing that it was, the problem was leftism, and that was why Hitler was bad.
There are a lot of Jews in Hollywood who feel they have a perverse leftist view of history pushed by the Soviet Union, that what really destroyed Europe was Christianity. It was not fascism, it was not communism, it was not leftism, it was Christianity. And therefore the cure to intolerance is to bash the hell out of Christianity. And so there's a war. There certainly is a war on Christianity. It's coming from some people who are secular Jews. It's coming from a lot of leftists. But yeah, I mean there's no question that evangelical Christians support Israel at a much higher clip and much more substantially than most Jews in America do, because most Jews in America don't care about Judaism.
And Christina Hoff Sommers, who is also Jewish, I believe, also went on Red Ice TV by accident. Because that's what happens when you don't look into who you're hanging around with, and you push a bunch of right-wing nonsense. And later, I think she expressed regret and said she didn't know. But how does that accidentally happen? How do you accidentally go on a Nazi podcast? You need to at least Google. If you just look at their Twitter timeline, their Twitter timelines are full of their Nazi bullshit. Yeah. How do you go on someone's podcast without even looking at that? It's insane. If we just go down the list of, let's do that. Let's go down the list of the main IDW characters mentioned in the Renegades of the Intellectual Dark Web and just talk about where they are now. So
go for it.
Sam Harris, my favorite one. He's pumping out genocidal propaganda nonstop these days. He is basically saying, don't be deterred by these images of babies being pulled out of the rubble. You have to keep reminding yourself that this is moral and it's a fight between good and evil and light and darkness and whatever bullshit Netanyahu was saying, children of darkness versus children of light. And he's talked about how ethnic cleansing isn't really such a big deal because it's just like people moving when they don't get along. A couple of years ago, I didn't like my neighbor and we moved. I guess that's ethnic cleansing? No, that's not. People moving when they don't get along, that's not what ethnic cleansing is. That is Sam Harris minimizing ethnic cleansing. And saying it's fine, actually. Not a big deal. Even Bill Maher actually did a little monologue on how there have been so many ethnic cleansings. So, I mean, what's another one? What's the big deal, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and it's like that Lindsey Graham just the other day said that, well, the United States did a nuclear bombs on Japan in World War II, so What was wrong with that? And why not give Israel some nuclear weapons and have them do that to Gaza too, if they want to? I mean,
It's
just
so
absolutely sick.
unhinged. It's unhinged beyond belief that these people can say this stuff when they know other people are listening, when they're being recorded. Like,
Yeah,
they
and
do
they
not even
lie
try.
so obvious. Like they claim it's an existential threat. Like Hamas, a ragtag group of people with some shitty guns, is somehow going to eradicate a neighbor. Like there's probably not even 30,000 people in all of their military, much less than that. Like the idea that they're going to eradicate Israel is complete bullshit, and it's an obvious lie. But yeah, but they have to say that, and it's asinine. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Candace Owens. Yeah, she's gone full Nazi, basically a black Nazi, because this goes back to Lionel Trilling. These are irritable mental gestures. So you can have a black Nazi if you your ideas are irritable mental gestures. And
I mean, I did a whole Twitter space on multiracial Nazis. There's a bunch of them from different countries, different cultures, definitely non-white. It's unfortunate, but they do exist.
they do. Yeah, and Ben Shapiro, we talked about him. Just going down our list here.
There's Dave Rubin, who is always, always, always unhinged and ridiculous, but like now, his racism, his hate is so unfiltered, right? Like before, he used to at least try to push the idea that maybe he was liberal-ish, but now he does not even bother with that. He's tweeting stuff like, there's a picture of women wearing this T-shirt that said something like, I don't know, fatties for Palestine or something. And he quote tweets their photo and he's like, even Hamas wouldn't rape you. It's just so despicable, which of course, I don't know if he did it deliberately, but is also a reference to Sargon of Akkad, what he said to a politician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, who knows? But
a few years ago, he was
not
like
pretending to be liberal anymore. Like it became so obvious that he wasn't.
Eric Weinstein, who's doing this bizarre, also Israel defending that is like, to the victims go the spoils in this era of Instagram. So he is implying that the whole strategy of Palestinians is to be victimized and murdered and video it to get the sympathy of the world. Like, it's so fucked. And Brett and Heather are doing this. They're usual. They're anti-vax. They're all kinds of conspiracy theorists. And they did this live stream recently about, they titled it, or they tweeted about it being where we wrestle with God. They criticized the new atheists.
Oh, yeah.
I had a quick listen. I don't think they're like, turning to religion or anything, but they're also saying that, the new atheists fucked it up because we wouldn't say that religion is completely useless or bullshit.
Yeah.
And we also wouldn't say that creationism is good. So they're also like,
we need a middle ground.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need that. Well, and like in the creationists, like they have this idea of their talking point. They call it, we need to teach the controversy. As if there is a controversy about whether evolution happened or not. Like it is, yeah. And then of course we have to talk about Mary Weiss herself. That she was the one who really catapulted the IDW figures into the international discussion, frankly. And she was from the very beginning just a conventional libertarian. That's what she was, and it's like, and I think that may be worth just a little discussion. That from, let's say, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, like a lot of libertarians who weren't very smart, which is most of them, they actually thought that they were liberal. But there's two areas where you can really see that, and that is stand-up comedy and the sort of alternative newspaper scene that emerged in the 60s and later. That there was a lot of cross-pollination between libertarians and progressives in those days, because the primary issues, libertarians actually agreed with the left on them. So like drug legalization or marijuana, sex work legalization, whether you should be allowed to be gay in public or same-sex marriage. Like these were things that libertarians agreed with the left on, but they never paid attention to the underlying reasons for why these ideas were being promoted by progressives. They didn't understand them. And so once finally, pretty much in every industrialized country, those viewpoints like marijuana legalization or abortion, homosexuality being non-criminalized, like these are all vast majority beliefs that the left has moved on to trying to help other people be able to have freedom and have personal autonomy. And the libertarians are angry about that. And they're angry also that the Democratic Party in the US finally decided to throw away the Bill Clinton sort of triangulation centrist crap and went back to the original premise of the party of the 20th century, which was there's a lot of people who need help economically, and we can afford to do it as the richest country in the world. Yeah, and like Barry Weiss and Elon Musk, and I'm like all these people, they're not very smart, and so they never paid attention to political theory, and they didn't understand they were always on the right.
Yeah, they're pretty far on the right, I'd say. Like Barry Weiss she's BFFs with white nationalist Douglas Murray. If that does not bother you as a Jewish person, then there's something deeply, deeply wrong.
Yeah, and maybe the last one, we should maybe talk about Douglas Murray a little bit, because and the idea of cultural Christianity or Christian atheism. For people who don't know it, you've delved into that recently, just for people who want to check that out. But you want to talk about it a little bit?
Like I did an episode on Dawkins where he had this clip go viral recently about talking about how he's culturally Christian and he was panicking about how churches are being erased and being replaced with mosques because no one goes to church anymore, but Muslims are building more and more mosques. It's like another version of the Great Replacement theory, basically. And he's not even religious. But he's like, I don't want to lose that. And I would be sad if we replace Easter with the celebration of Ramadan. Shit like that. So he calls himself a cultural Christian. Douglas Murray also goes on Christian channels and talks about how there's a God-shaped hole left by wokeness. And Dave Rubin turned back to God. Ian Hirst-Yelly recently converted to Christianity. Not because of some deep belief, but because she thinks it'll help in the fight against wokeness. And yeah, great stuff. Very intellectual. Great ideas.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, again, like the idea that these are new, the claim that these are new ideas, it's bullshit. Like you are not, you're by definition, if you're converting to Christianity, you are not advancing some new idea that no one.
Right. And then to go back to Douglas Murray, he's also been going on about how all Palestinians are responsible, how we can't feel bad for even the civilians because they could have overthrown their government, right? Like, it's just such a bad justification for collectively punishing 2 million people that he didn't.
And it is the same justification used by Hamas and Hezbollah and other Islamic suicide
and
bombers
Osama bin
against
Laden.
Israel.
Fucking bin Laden had that justification. And the 7/7 bombers in England had that justification. So that is literal terrorist talking points. And he's also like pro settlements in the West Bank, which even Sam Harris is not for. Like, that's how far right he is, Douglas Murray.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, you just go down the line. This is.
My gosh. I checked his Twitter and it is unhinged. There's like all kinds of talk of like globalist cabals and lots of anti-Semitic stuff, but then the occasional, anti-Semitism is bad. Like, it's very incoherent. I don't understand what's happening. Just climate change denial, all kinds of conspiracy theories, anti-vax, of course. So you can see like exactly what's happened to all these IDWers that were mentioned as these great intellectuals in that article. I mean, they were garbage even at that time. Everyone that knew laughed at that article because they were known as terrible for like years before that. But now they have just plunged into such new embarrassing depths that, like, Michael Shermer used to be someone that people look to debunk conspiracy theories. He runs Skeptic magazine. He used to debunk Holocaust deniers and stuff. But now he's doing like Holocaust revisionism, as is Douglas Murray, both in the service of, as is Sam Harris, all in the service of defending Israel, right? They're saying that even the Nazis weren't as bad as Hamas. Even the Nazis felt bad about what they did. Even the Nazis hid what they did. It's not true. It's not true. This is minimizing the harm and the awfulness of Nazis, all to defend Israel. It's so gross.
Yeah, and they're doing the same task that Richard Spencer. He has said repeatedly that Israel is his inspiration. The right-wing Israel is his inspiration to create an ethno-state and use racist policies and ethnic cleansing, and like these guys are all on the same page, even though they don't want to admit it. And I think hopefully that's pretty apparent for everybody after this discussion here.
And the last person I just wanted to give a mention to is Camille Paglia, this supposed heterodox feminist that they all seem to like. What nobody mentions, though, is that for like a decade or two, maybe a decade, she was like vocally pro-pedophilia. She was pro-NAMBLA, which is North American Man-Boy Love Association. Like, this is one of the things that made her like edgy and heterodox. She was pro-child porn, just the most despicable, vile things that you can think of. This is not like some kind of edgy, interesting idea. It's just the most despicable, criminal things that she's supporting, right? Like, I think she walked it back.
Yeah, and you have to, if your sole stated belief is I am in favor of free speech and open ideas. Okay, well then that means we need to debate with pedophiles, according to you.
She doesn't want to debate them. No. She's in favor. She does not want to debate them. She likes them.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I'm saying, well, not only you have to debate them, like at the very least you have to debate them and let them advocate for their ideas. But then you have to even allow them and praise them for doing it, because that's free speech, what they're doing. Like, we need more speech. We have to have more speech in America and in Canada or wherever else.
Except woke speech. We can't have that because we need to bring in the cops. We need to bring in the cops and have them beat down on students.
And in
because
prison.
That is, yes, and put them in prison for peacefully protesting a genocide. But yeah. So that is where the IDW are at today. And I think, yes, everyone can recognize, I hope, that they are not very heterodox. They're just peddling the same shit under different names. Before it was political correctness, and it was like anti-social justice warrior, then it was anti-wokeness and heterodox and
multiculturalism. They were angry about that in the 90s.
Yes.
And if there's anybody, out there who disagrees with what we said, especially the people we mentioned, like I personally, have me on your podcast. I will debate you about any of this shit, but you're all a bunch of chicken shits and you never will. So I can rest assured they will never contact me.
Sam Harris will never, ever debate me again because he's terrified of me.
Well, they're cowards and liars is really what it comes down to.
All right. Okay, shall we take some questions then?
Yeah.
All right, Alan, what's up?
Hey, okay. Well, but I didn't catch everything, but I caught most of the last hour and change. Yeah, you guys made some really interesting points there about the IDW, and like they have this whole victim mentality of their own that they project onto actual victims, like Palestinians in Gaza and everyone else. And some of the things you mentioned about Sam Harris saying that, what did he say about like don't be disturbed too much by the dead children, like this is for the greater good, like versus evil. And also that Eric Weinstein quote about like Instagram victimology or whatever, and like this being like this evil manipulative tactic of Palestinians to get themselves killed and in mass numbers and make us feel bad about it. Like that, I think is really insidious and infuriating, and also like gaslighty abuser language of like, this hurts me more than it hurts you, and how dare you make me feel bad about all the things, horrible things I'm doing to you. Like, I've got a guilty
Absolutely.
I've got a guilty conscience, but and how dare you remind me of it? And so I'm going to double down on what I'm doing. But I'm not a bad person. You're a bad person for making me feel bad about what I'm doing to you. Like that whole move is just, it's horrible. It's classic abusive language, but it's just so fascinating, the psychology behind it. And I think it also ties back to what you guys were talking about with the history of conservatism. Matt, I think you were talking about that with like William F. Buckley, like, and like the kind of aggrievement of all these white guys, mainly rich white guys, especially throughout history. But like this idea of like, we're gentlemen and benevolent, and we're nice to our women and our slaves, and we're kindly masters, and you abolitionists slash Jews slash race traders, or whatever language they used, slash
are persecuting us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah, well, it's
like you guys are the real bad guys,
Yeah.
and the real racist, race mongers, baiters, hate mongers, riling people up against their better interests, which of course is to remain under our boots. But we're actually good people. Don't forget that. And like, how dare you make us say that what we're doing is bad? Like that makes you the real evil person. Yeah, it's just such a fascinating move. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and that's why I always say that right-wing politics is much more about psychology than it is about ideology. Yeah, that's a good example.
Well, yeah, and that's why you hear them go on about like anti-white racism, right? While they deny that other kinds of racism are a big problem these days. Sam Harris has said, like, we're on the last lap. The last lap. And then he does this like Mott and Bailey thing where he acts like people aren't acknowledging that there has been any movement or any progress since the times of segregation or the times of slavery. And he's like, but things have improved so much. So why are you still complaining? Like, we're now on the last lap of racism. But wait a minute. Let's talk about this other thing, anti-white racism, which is like really, really a huge problem right now. And white guys are being silenced left, right, and center. And yeah, it really is awful, gaslighty, but also very intriguing kind of move.
Yeah, I just have this image of like all of these guys and women and whoever else is part of the IDW, like spiritually, if not literally, they're all like an aggrieved Gen Xer who's like mad about hippies of the 60s and the new left, or like younger left wingers, millennials, Zoomers now. And they're like posting on Substack, and they're like, man, these kids and their freaking social SJW woke whatever, and like caring about Palestine just because of TikTok and all this bullshit that they talk about. And like, it's just like, oh, you care about things? You care about changing the world, imagining a better world? How uncool and unhip and pathetic you are, a pathetic loser, as opposed to me who is writing all this, I'm not mad, don't put in the newspaper that I'm mad on my Substack or whatever. Or
well, and by the way, and that actually was the ideology of South Park. That was South Park's entire shtick. Caring about the world is for losers, basically, and it dovetails perfectly with the Christian rights agenda, which again everybody on the IDW never talks about, even though it is very obviously the biggest threat to atheists, which most of them claim to be, in worldwide. Very obviously, there is no greater threat to atheists than that. But yeah, like the Christian right, they also use that rhetoric that you're talking about there, Alan, with that they literally say we cannot have religious freedom unless we are repressing non-heterosexuals, unless we're repressing Islam, unless we're going after atheists. We can't. Our religious freedom, our religion has to be the law. Otherwise, we're being oppressed. And they literally say this. This is what they believe and say. It's incredible.
These days, you can't
All
even
right.
say you're a Christian in America.
Or white, or
It's
man.
illegal. It's illegal.
Yeah. All right, Nick.
Just a quick question. Who do you think will be the new crop of whatever they're called? Intellectual dark web.
Heterodox thinker.
Yeah.
In the U.S. or internationally or what?
Anywhere.
There's always a new crop. I mean, if you look at the less obviously famous people that these current IDW and heterodox types are hanging around with, those will be the up and coming ones. Like there's a whole crop of ex-Muslims that they like to promote that are now doing white identity politics on their behalf. It's like, oh, look, I love it when white people have a lot of babies. I'm sorry if I'm an immigrant, but like we also have to have babies. We're not going to stop. Like that's how I've seen recently, like a couple of these Quillette fan ex-Muslims talking. And then there's a whole bunch of other like centristy types that are doing podcasts around them. And it's like some are critical, but like very mildly and softly and gently critical. So it's like still a friendly area. And there's an endless supply of these types.
Yeah. Well, and politician wise, as well, that's also true. I mean, you guys up in Canada have Pierre. How do you?
Poilievre,
Poilievre, that he's basically just regurgitates American right wing talking points nonstop. That's all he does, and
he is a Jordan Peterson fan. Can you imagine, like someone? God.
And then I'd say in the U.S., it looks like that J.D. Vance probably he hits all the talking points and bullshit very well.
Oh, and there's also the son of Hamas guy lately. Oh my gosh, he's so crazy. He's like this right-wing ex-Muslim Christian convert, and he is actually the son of one of the founders of Hamas, but he's gone full like PragerU, and he just exists to say like Muslims are inherently violent, Palestinians are terrible, and Israel is the best. And he's paraded around the right-wing circuit to go around saying that. And if anyone challenges him, he's like, "You're going to challenge me? I am Palestinian. I am Arab. You can't challenge me." Using that identity politics that we were talking about earlier. Alan, did you have something to add before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, what you were mentioning there about like the ex-Muslim and like the weaponization of like a handful of extremely fringe people and hiding behind their own right-wing identity politics. Like it just reminds me of a few things, but one of them is like, I think it was a long New York Times article about the leader of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed, a real evil man and really powerful man who likes to tell people, like Westerners especially, he likes to tell them, look, if you had democracy in the Arab world, Al-Qaeda would win 99.9% of the vote. So you need someone like me to be the autocrat strong.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. It also reminds me of, who's that? There's some British pundit / like right-wing Islamophobic pundit. He has some.
That could be a million people.
But this particular guy was like was in a past life a major member of, I can't pronounce it, but it's H_BT.
Hizbut Tahrir.
Yeah. Do you know who I'm talking about? I think
Majid.
His name
Majid Nawaz.
Yes. So you know who this guy is, yeah.
Yeah, we discussed him already, actually.
Yeah. He's
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, he is.
But sorry, yeah.
Anti-vax, anti-everything.
I feel like between that and like Also, the UAE and Saudi Arabia actually are promoting a lot of the quote unquote anti-woke, and also like they were like really aggressively attacking in campaigns the Squad and the Muslim congresswomen Omar and Rashida Tlaib.
It wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, there are a lot of right-wing authoritarian places now getting their language from Western right-wing intellectuals. I did a podcast about this like a few years ago with Pakistani women, and they were talking about how the IDW and Jordan Peterson and the rise of their popularity and those anti-woke talking points are happening now in Pakistan. I've seen it in Saudi as well. But I got to move on to the next question now.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Azad?
No, thank you so much for giving me a mic. And I don't really have a question, just an observation I wanted to share is that, well, where we stand right now with this war going on Gaza, I feel like there's like more. Well, I mean, the left and right is more of a Venn diagram now, and it's a lot of people who ally on different things, but like a lot of people who have traditionally stood on the left side, I mean, like despite not opposing wars and stuff, like, or people who don't even care about wars and stuff, like find themselves at this crossroad of like where and how to not support this war or how to support this war and stuff. But clearly, like, because of how a lot of people, especially in the Western world, how they see the world is like, the divisions of like, oh, this land belongs to Muslims and this land belongs to this because this land belongs to us. And whoever that us is, whoever they get to decide, like whenever they want and stuff, that's what I feel like is where we stand, the crossroads where we stand at. And while the world is becoming more and more conservative, especially the Western world, the global conservatives are also coming together to like sort of take over territory and expand their expansionist ideas and control over other parts of the world and stuff. So like that's just how I feel.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're right to say that because there is conservatisms and authoritarianisms, which are the two major right-wing philosophical trends, if you can call them that. Yeah, they basically, essentially, they distill to one point, which is that the people who have been in power in the past must continue to be in power. Like, that's basically what they are all about. And so you see that in India with Hindu nationalism, and you see that in various right-wing Islamic viewpoints. And of course, you see that in the Western world with Christian fascism, which is absolutely becoming a thing. And I think you're right also that I think that the Gaza conflict, it has exposed that a lot of people who marketed themselves as on the left, in fact, never were. And like those are pretty much the only people who really are following politics to a large degree and really actually know about it. Like, it's only people who are on the right who support the Netanyahu government there, I would say.
Right. I think when it comes to Palestine, you see a lot of people that have an exception, right? Progressive for everything else but that. Free speech for everything else but that.
Yeah, and not
it's
really.
Been interesting to see.
Yep.
If we don't have any other questions, maybe we can just start wrapping up now. But yeah, it was fun. IDW, as you all know, is, if you know me, it is one of my favorite topics, just because that layer of dishonesty and that intellectual plausible deniability, which remains less and less, but still fools some people. It really fascinates me, right? Much more than the obvious right-wing stuff, much more than the obvious far right. It's this intellectual arm of right-wingery that I want to see thoroughly dismantled and exposed. I mean, this is why I think it's so important that when you talk about the IDW or related heterodox groups, that you have to talk about their politics. You can't like omit such a major part of their existence from your analysis. And if you can't,
then you have to talk about the history as well.
Right,
they're
and
just doing the same thing as these other people.
Exactly, and if you can't see the very basic point that the IDW is just another right-wing rebranding exercise, one of many, as Matthew just said, if you know the history. If you can't see that, then I don't know how effective an IDW analysis can be if you're just talking about everything other than their politics. I think it's very important to mention that Sam Harris is right-wing because he insists so desperately, just like Dave Rubin did once upon a time, that he is not right-wing. And it's important for people to see through that. Otherwise, what is even the point at looking at the IDW, right? If you're not even trying to interrogate their main grift, there's simply no point.
Yeah, and it's like, it's fine to criticize particular things that they say or particular viewpoints.
Oh, of course.
But if you don't understand why do they have these dumb beliefs, why do they say these stupid and extreme things, if you don't understand why, then you're not serving your audience well. That you're not giving them the full context. The full context is these are just conventional conservatives. That's what they are. And look, hey, if somebody wants to have those beliefs, I don't give a shit. Like I as an ex-Mormon, I have lots of Mormon relatives, and I do not debate Mormonism with them. I'm just like, look, if you want to believe it, whatever, go ahead and do that. Just do not ask me about it because I know more about it than you do. And I'm sure
right.
You as an ex-Muslim probably feel the same way about Islam, right? I know.
I'd love to debate my relatives on Islam, but they don't love to debate me so much. No, we often don't debate it. I mean, it doesn't end well if we do. But yeah. Let's say we
but at least acknowledge that that's like it with religion. At least they're acknowledging that they have those religious views, right? They're not saying,
exactly.
Well, like and Jordan Peterson is the worst example of this. Jordan Peterson is an atheist.
No, I firmly disagree with that analysis.
Well,
it makes me very annoyed. Go on, present your case very quickly.
He's not a Christian. He's not a Christian. He doesn't believe the Bible is true. But he has this whole grift of telling evangelicals, because that's who actually believes this from him, and no one else does. Basically saying that, well, the Bible is true in the sense that it's the foundation of our culture. And so we have to act as if it was true, because then our culture will be destroyed if we don't. And I can't tell you, like, go in Jordan Peterson's mentions whenever he says shit like that. They will be filled with evangelicals being like, "Oh, I've been praying for you, Jordan, that you would come to God. I can see that you."
Yeah, but he's already there. No, just because he puts a fancier spin on it, he doesn't. So he likes to play both sides. He does not want to lose his more secular audience. He does not want to lose his more fundy audience. So, but he's still a very strong believer. He never says that he doesn't believe. He just puts it in flowery language and makes it like be obscured a little bit. And he won't answer the questions very straightforwardly. Do you believe in God? What do you mean what do you mean by believe? What do you mean by God? And he'll make up some bullshit so he doesn't have to give you a straight answer. But this idea that he's an atheist was spread by some stupid internet atheist creator. Not you. No offense. But like, I feel like that's just, I think it was like a method to piss off Jordan Peterson and his fans by saying, well, you're an atheist. You don't actually believe, or you don't actually follow what you say you do. But he very much is also a traditional fundamentalist. He's just used more flowery language. Trust me, look into this. He is not an atheist. He began on Canadian TV, very, very anti-atheist, extremely anti-atheist.
Yeah, well, I guess, maybe atheist is not the right word, but I don't think he believes the Bible is literally
He
true.
may not be a literalist in the regular sense, but he is definitely
but he flatters
fundy Christian.
Yeah, like he says,
he's a fundy Christian, though. Like
to be them, even if he doesn't believe it, he says it's wonderful. And that's what I'm saying,
because he likes that. Yeah.
And that's who that's who his
And his
audience
daughter
at this
is
point.
married to a more conventional religious fundie who's also called Jordan, and she's had her coming back to Christ moment recently, and she's been posting about how finding Jesus is so amazing, even though like she knew Jesus even before that, but I guess she really found him now.
Yeah, and of course Russell Brand, that's his thing.
He's also been baptized.
Yeah, no, it's like it is so. I mean, it's so absolutely cynical on the part of these people, and some of them, most recently Lauren Southern, actually did believe the bullshit that they preach, and like that
trad wife
really
stuff.
Yeah, the trad wife stuff. Like for right wing women, and I worked in Republican politics for 14 years in various capacities, and the only women that I ever came across, with maybe a handful of exceptions, who were right wing Christians. That's why they were there, because they why else would you want to embrace a party that wants to repress women unless God told you to do it in your mind? But even they, once they actually have to live their values, they either don't want to do it at all, or they eventually it collapses for them, and they just run away from it. I mean, like Laura Ingraham from the original is a great example of that. That Laura Ingraham has never been married. She adopted children to become a mother. And that was literally what the right wing in the 80s was so upset about. Single mother Murphy Brown, Dan Quayle used that to become a national figure, to say that was wrong. But this is literally how Laura Ingraham lives. And at the same time, she calls herself a right-wing Catholic fundamentalist, but she's not married. Like she's rejecting the most fundamental sacrament of the church.
It's a hard set of values to live by in 2024, right? Like if you could just be honest about that, like if that would be a more honest way to be, but they can't, right? Like embracing traditionalism to that degree is just not practical in the modern world.
Yeah, not even.
But all right, Azad, did you have something quick to say? Because I really got to run after that.
Yeah, what you were saying earlier, you guys were talking about of Jordan Peterson referencing Bible, because that's the thing is like for all of these people who have sort of like this idea of like getting followers and finding followers, always use like objects and stuff. I mean, it's the same thing with every faith and every religion, is that they have like certain fundamentals. Like all nation state, that is like, I feel like is the weak link which has bonded all these conservative people and also all these like neoconservatives, I would say, or people who sort of like the Bill Maher kind of Democrats, liberals, of believing in one kind of truth versus the other, or one reality over the other and stuff. And that's the thing is with respect to Israel, there's always this idea that even in the liberal left is that it's like there's a reference of it in the Torah, like 4,000 years ago it was theirs, so it has to go. There's always like a reference of a book which kind of like discredits and makes it hard to talk about humanity, I feel, even though in their sense they're talking about humanity because that is where their humanity comes from, unfortunately.
Yeah, but these books are like ancient, right? So we can't expect them to live up to morals and values today. But people do, and that's why their morals and values, if they're getting them from old books, are and only old books that are thousands of years old, I feel like they're gonna not be aligned with our world today.
And it's why they have so many problems with themselves and everyone else.
All right, everyone. That's it from me. I really got to run, but thank you so much to everyone who joined, and you can catch up on the rest of the conversation later because it will be recorded and posted on my podcast feed. So do look out for it, and yeah.
Yep. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully you are following us both. I encourage you to follow Ina if you're not, and follow me if you're not either. So thanks. All right.
Bye.